Hi everyone, and welcome back to Deck Tech. This week we're embracing the December chills and taking ICE Rider Calyrex VMAX for a spin. But before we jump into the nuts and bolts of this deck, I want to apologize, first of all, if I sound a little stuffy. The heating went out in my building overnight, and I woke up feeling not too great this morning, so apologies for that. And the second is, please take a second to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and I suppose hit the notification bell to keep more of these wonky deck profiles coming straight to you. I would really love to hit 500 subscribers by Christmas or New Year's, you know, can be flexible on that. So every little bit of support helps. Now then, ICE Rider Calyrex. This one was admittedly pretty tricky to make work, more so out of my stubbornness than anything else. See, ICE Rider Calyrex is just a beat stick. It does a ton of damage for cheap, and in standard, it's basically surviving right now by relying on the crutch of heavy energy removal and ability lock. Now, while I really hate that any deck might need to rely on things like hammers to work, I did actually think there was something to the path to the peak versions of the deck. Like, if you can ability lock everything relevant, then suddenly ICE Rider Calyrex looks a lot better not only in standard, but especially in the expanded format. So the basic idea is the same as most standard builds. You use Melony to power up ICE Rider Calyrex, and then just max lance everything in sight while your opponent scrambles to get their board together while under path to the peak. The Inteleon line is here to fetch you trainers as required, and then offer a bit of snipe damage once you've evolved all the way up. And obviously the nice thing is that you can use said engine while you are under your own path to the peak. Speaking of path to the peak, this is here to shut off any in-play abilities from rulebox Pokémon, which disrupts pretty much everything in Expanded. With this in play, your vanilla ICE Rider can just muscle its way through the opponent's board, and your Inteleon line, as mentioned before, can help you set up because it's not a problem for them, they're not rulebox Pokémon. But sticking a stadium is actually a tall order in Expanded, funny enough, and after slogging things out with a silent lab version of this deck, I actually decided to include a 1/1 Alolan Muk line to provide some stickier ability lock. Alolan Muk turns off the abilities of all basic Pokémon, which is, you know, most of the best Pokémon in Expanded, while also not bothering our Inteleon line because Drizzile and everything above it obviously are not basic Pokémon. So this, alongside Path to the Peak, can just straight up freeze some decks and let ICE Rider Calyrex do its thing, which is smash everything in sight. There is a Spiritomb here because I really hate Mad Party and Mew Mew decks, so, you know, tech when you can, and the rest of the deck is pretty straightforward. Our draw supporters, not named Melony, are there to refill our hand and potentially disrupt the opponent. Marnie and N can each be pretty nasty under the ability lock of Path to the Peak or Power of Alchemy, so I felt like they were a must in this particular build. And Guzma is there to shuffle the board as necessary, obviously. Quick note here, there is no Pokemon Ranger because I kinda feel like for this build at least, the Zacian ADP matchup is just a little bit too rough, so I was willing to accept the auto loss there. We've of course got a pretty stacked Pokeball package to keep our amphibians accessible, Level Ball and Dive Ball obviously turning into pretty much any card you need thanks to Shady Dealings, and Ultra Ball being there to do the same thing while also getting Water Energy in the discard pile for Melony. And between Floatstone, Scoop Up Net, and Scoop Up Cyclone, we have plenty of mobility and even a bit of prize denial to work with. Super Rod is here because while Melony does get you back 1 Water Energy before you attack, I have actually found that the deck can run out of energy at times. Smart opponents will know not to bench too many Pokemon, and thus it's not really worth it most of the time to go for Ride of the High King. So this provides you a bit of safety while allowing you the flexibility to also maybe recover your Alolan Muk line, for example, if you've discarded them. So I really like it for that particular reason. And, you know, the basic energy count is pretty tight here. You can search for it with Capacious Bucket, which is obviously great. And between Melony and Super Rod, you should have just enough of a steady supply to take your 6 prizes for game. Now, I can't say that this is the most meta way, or even necessarily the most efficient way to play ICE Rider in Expanded. I do have to admit that the turbo versions of the deck are probably more consistent or threatening overall. But, you know, if you want to play a longer game or take a more tactical approach than those pure brute force builds, then I actually think this list is a great starting point. And now that we've got our loadout set, let's skate on over to the expanded ladder and see if we can actually make this deck work. Okay everyone, so we're heading here into a game and I spot the dark deck box right away. And you know, I am occasionally a chump, so I'm betting that it is a dark deck of some kind. Maybe it's Eternatus, could be Turbo Dark. Not sure entirely. I will find out in a second since my opponent did elect to go first. And as for me, I'm forced to take a mulligan, which is never great. And seeing the hand that I get off the mulligan, I think, okay, this is probably going to be a quick one. Especially once my opponent drops and then flips over their 2 basics. I see right away I'm going to be up against a Mew Mew Dark Box deck, and hey, they got the Battle Compressor to start as well, so this should be interesting. They're taking their time to load up the discard pile with Darkrai GX to begin with. They're also going to burn a Hypnotoxic Laser here, which I think this actually ended up being pretty relevant later on in the game. I think they did this primarily to play their hand down a little bit so that they could draw into a few more cards, but it would have been really, really beneficial to hold on to that if possible, because it would have saved them a lot of grief later on. But again, you know, there's a good chance that they would have just had to have discarded it anyway, so playing it down and potentially sleep locking my basic in the active, I guess it's worth the risk. And as for them, you know, they're setting up pretty well. They have the Sneasel in the active. I'm not going to be able to do anything to that, so they can probably guarantee themselves a Weavile quickly enough. And they'll get the Galarian Moltres V into play as well. They have a couple of Darkrai GX in the discard pile. So they should be able to get a good 3 or 4 energy into play on their first turn. So once that Weavile GX is in play, they will have access to pretty much whatever attack they want. Primarily the Mew Mew Dark Box here, you're either hitting for massive damage with Greninja and Zoroark GX attack, or you're using the more interesting tech options like Umbreon and Darkrai or Darkrai GX. And wouldn't you know it, my opponent also had the turn 1 boost shake to get the Weavile GX up and running. So, you know, things are not great, things are not looking good for me here. But thankfully I did get the god tier top deck of Scoop Up Net, and you know, I'm looking very intently at that Alolan Muk right now. If I can get that into play, then I actually have a chance at this game. But if Alolan Grimer gets KO'd before it can evolve up, well, then I will pretty much have to scoop, because there's just no way to catch up on the incredible lead my opponent has. So, you know, I do scoop it up, I put the Sobble up in the active, and then I just go for the Keep Calling. Now, you know, I am kind of going all in here because I've only got the one ICE Rider Calyrex V, but, you know, there's not much else I could do at the time. And at least this way I have access to 1 Drizzile, and assuming my opponent doesn't play Pokemon Catcher or anything weird like that, I know my Alolan Grimer is safe on my bench, and I can evolve that up next turn in order to start, you know, slowing my opponent down a little bit. You know, they're well established enough at this point, so I can't slow them down too much. They'll certainly have enough energy in play in order to get an attack off with Mew Mew, and thanks to Dark Patch, among other things, they will very quickly get a ton of energy into play here. And I think after this Dire Flame Wings, yep, they got a good 6 Dark Energy in play, which means after the manual retreat here, Dark Pulse is doing a crazy amount of damage. I think just enough to OHKO and ICE Rider Calyrex V, funny it up. So yeah, things are not great. And now, of course, they're going to start moving up the Dark Energy here. Now, the only thing I have going for me in this situation is the fact that they've bench locked themselves. So between the Crobat and the 2 Darkrai GXs, they don't have room to play down a Darkrai EX, for example, or anything like that. They can't play down additional Crobats, and I know that's probably going to be the case because, you know, typically if these decks are playing Viridian Forest, they're not also playing Skyfield. So I know that bench is pretty much set, so if I can neutralize the Mew Mew by playing down Alolan Muk, and I can neutralize the Galarian Moltres V, then actually there's not too much that they can do to me here. Now they take the KO there, which is fine by me. You know, at the very least now I have access to Drizzile. I've got a Water Energy there in hand, so in theory I can attach and then Melony up. Hopefully I'm not stuck just doing pierce damage. That would not be ideal, but at this point, you know, I can't really be choosy about what I'm gonna be attacking with. So I'm gonna Melony up. I see a dive ball off the top there, which is great. Now I'm gonna make a risky play here. I'm actually gonna grab the VMAX instead of a backup ICE Rider Calyrex V. And the reason I did that was because I felt I was already so far behind that I really just needed to apply a ton of pressure. Between that and the Alolan Muk, I was basically trying to say, okay, well, what I'm gonna do here is lock you out of your main attacker. I'm gonna put a ton of damage onto it so that, you know, that's given me access to a nice easy 3 prizes. You cannot commit to this Mew Mew anymore because between the damage and the fact that it's ability locked, you know, you have to go for a hard pivot now. Sure, they could go into Galarian Moltres V, but if they do that, I will make pretty short work of their only energy acceleration engine. And, you know, as it is now, because they can't play down the Darkrai EX, they're gonna have to burn resources, they're gonna have to burn their dark energies in order to retreat. The only other route that my opponent has here, and the one that it looks like they are going for, is moving the energy onto Darkrai GX. What they'll probably try to do here is burn a ton of cards, you know, draw through your deck as fast as possible, and try to hit a Hypnotoxic Laser so that they can poison my ICE Rider Calyrex VMAX and then instantly KO it with Dead End GX. Now that's all well and good, but they burned that one Hypnotoxic Laser earlier on, and the thing about this deck is that generally speaking, you know, they don't go all in on that poison Dead End GX strategy, so typically they only play a max of 2 Hypnotoxic Lasers. So I liked the odds that they weren't necessarily going to be able to draw into it, especially because, again, they don't have access to an additional Crobat V because their bench is full, and I didn't take a knockout on the last turn. So, you know, they're just going to Professor's Research here, get rid of some cards, and, you know, they can't even accelerate that back with Moltres now. So at the very least, I know they're going to have to retreat, burn 2 of the dark energies there, and, you know, they didn't hit the laser because they're actually moving energy over to Crobat V to try and manually poison me with the Venomous Fang attack. And for me, that's perfectly fine. They weren't able to get a field blower or anything else like that either. So I can actually just retreat my ICE Rider Calyrex VMAX out of the active and obviously take that poison status away. And lucky me, I do actually hit the ICE Rider V off the top. I've got the energy to go. And then I can just hit the N as well to kind of cut my opponent's hand down a little bit and give myself a few more options at the very least. So for my part, I'm actually just going to bring up the ICE Rider V. I'm perfectly comfortable at this point to just be attacking with that because I can get a 1-hit KO on pretty much everything outside of the Moltres, and the Moltres is just an Inteleon ping away after I attack anyways. So instead of going full in on a second VMAX, I think I can actually just chill here for a little bit and use the V to apply pressure. And of course that path to the peak is helpful because now, if the stadium sticks, my opponent is not going to be able to shuffle the dark energy around with Weavile GX either, which again is just helping me to slowly grind my opponent down. Doesn't work for long though because they have the counter stadium, because of course path to the peak never sticks in expanded. But still, they're in a bit of an awkward spot now because they've committed to the Crobat in the active. Again, they don't have access to a free retreat unless they have a switch, so they'll have to burn some energy to get that Crobat out of there if that's what they want to do. But instead they actually just boss up my ICE Rider Calyrex VMAX, knowing that it has a Float Stone attached to it, probably just to get the damage in, but also maybe they think I'll get a little sloppy and commit to attacking with that for the easy 2 prizes. But that's actually not going to be the case here. I'm not about that life. I'm not going to give them an easy 3 prizes if I can help it. So I'll just pitch the spare ICE Rider V and Water Energy so that I can turn Melony on. I'm going to accelerate to the benched V here, and then I will search for a way to get myself some energy. Now, I have a couple options. The obvious one here is to take a Capacious Bucket, which will get me the last 2 energy in my deck, thin it out a little bit, which would be great. But what I actually decide to do is just play extra careful and take the easy 3 prizes off of the board. Because, you know, for example, my opponent still, if there's a way, they could find a way to force up my ICE Rider Calyrex VMAX. Maybe they've got a Guzma or whatever, and they can steal the KO with Galarian Moltres V or even Darkrai if they have the Hypnotoxic Laser after the fact. So I just want to make sure that's not an option for them. And again, I'm perfectly comfortable at this point to just lean on the ICE Rider Calyrex V. 200 damage is more than enough to deal with anything on my opponent's board, and now that I have the Inteleon plus the 1 quick shooting ping on the Moltres, that can't come in either and make quick work of my V here. So the Glacial Lance will take the first 2 prizes for me here, pretty easy KO, and I've also taken 2 energy off of my opponent's board as well, so I'm slowly whittling down their resources. Now, obviously the great thing for me here is that even though they have a free bench space, they can't really play down a Crobat V or a Dedenne, because they won't really get any effect from it. So I know if they're going to be drawing into some extra cards here, they're going to have to rely on their draw supporter for the turn. And, you know, if they're smart, they'll maybe move up the energy and attack the Alolan Muk. That would be the reasonable thing to do so that they can get their turbo engine going again. But they're also going to be in a pretty risky position because once they commit those last 3 energies to Darkrai for that attack on the Alolan Muk, I'm just going to KO it back with Ice Rider V, and then they'll have no energy in play. They might have the means to bring it back fairly quickly, but then I'll just make short work of the Mewtwo or the Moltres, which will be, you know, their only other relevant attackers, right? And yeah, we see a pretty hard commit to the Darkrai GX, so they're going to go all in here. Either they're going to dig for the Hypnotoxic Laser, or they're just going to try and set up the 2-shot on me with a Dark Cleave. And they actually fetch a Dedenne GX with the Cherish Ball. I think they forgot that Alolan Muk was in play because they just moved the energy with their Weavile. So probably just forgetting how Alolan Muk's power of alchemy works. They'll get the hit in, which is perfectly fine by me, because now I have the ability to take all of their energy off the board. And, you know, I feel pretty safe in evolving my benched Ice Rider V into a VMAX as well. Because once I take care of this Darkrai GX and all the energy on board, it's going to be really hard for my opponent to try and set up a Hypnotoxic Laser instant combo KO. So we'll just evolve that one up, get it ready to go. I am going to Super Rod back a Sobble, an Ice Rider, and a Water Energy. I'd prefer not to put the Ice Rider back if I can avoid it, because it's just an extra card I don't really need, but you have to take the 3. And then I'm just going to quick shooting as well, just to really pressure the Moltres there and tell my opponent, don't bother. Do not bother with that, because I'm going to take you out pretty easily either way. And in fact, now that I've got the 40 ping on it, I think one more ping plus a full bench would mean that I could take the KO with Rider the High King as well. So it's putting my opponent in a pretty awkward spot. You know, I had the Melony combo for Glacial Lance, so that's another KO, and now I'm down to a pretty easy 2 prizes. So I could even evolve up, and then if I have access to the Guzma, for example, I can take a KO on any other Pokemon on the bench here. So they'll go for the research here. They've got Mewtwo in the active. Not too sure what they're doing here. Maybe just trying to thin their hand out a little bit. They dropped the N, which would have been really good for them to use. That really would have deprived me, but, you know, they have nothing here, so I'm going to just hit them with the well played. I will Melony onto my Ice Rider Calyrex V. I actually have enough energy to go for the Glacial Lance and take the KO, but I kind of missed it at the time. I was just so happy I managed to claw the game back that I really wanted to take the KO with Max Lance. So I will evolve up. I will take out that Mew Mew for my last 2 prizes. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is game. And there you go, ladies and gents. Ice Rider VMAX freezes a Mew Mew Dark Box in place for an icy finish. And honestly, that was a particularly satisfying win after my opponent opened up the literal nuts and had me thinking that I was going to be 6-0'd pretty quickly. But thankfully, I was able to stabilize, and after one particularly risky play, I managed to lock my opponent down and slowly force them to make more and more suboptimal plays until I could finally claw back control of the game. I knew, for example, that once Mew Mew itself was locked down, my opponent would try to regain some momentum by using that Hypnotoxic Laser and Dead End GX combo to knock out my VMAX. So, you know, by making them burn resources in order to dig for the laser, and by also sticking with Ice Rider Calyrex V a little bit later on, I could still trade well against my opponent's Pokemon, and then basically say, Sure, you have an option for a free KO, but at this point, it's not worth it at this time in the game. And really, once I reached that point where I was able to threaten a KO every turn with just the V, it was mostly just going to be a cleanup operation. Now, I think it's fair to say that the aggro version of this deck, like I mentioned before, the one with Aqua Patch, is probably better if you're looking to tear through the expanded ladder. But you know, if you've been maining Ice Rider in Standard and you want to give Expanded a try, then I think maybe this deck gives you a smoother transition to the Expanded format from your Standard build than the Turbo version might. It's a fun build, it can frustrate your opponents to no end without resorting to hammers, and you can still body the tag teams that we all love to hate. So, you know, why not give it a try? And that'll wrap it up for this video. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. Please help your boy hit the big 500 because nothing would make me happier for the holidays. And as for the rest, I will catch you all next time. And until then, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and as always, take it easy.